It isn't often that WWE has three supreme talent come right out of the gate and becoming so popular and connected with the fans. The Shield as a trio was incredible and gifted WWE three new stars to focus on over the next couple of years. Their efforts of pushing other wrestlers failed badly and the generation itself felt pretty lost. Because on paper, it was supposed to be John Morrison, Dolph Ziggler, Kofi Kingston, and The Miz leading things. And again, it might seem crazy, but you have to look at it from that time's perspective. I remember they were calling Morrison the next Shawn Michaels, which was insane in itself. The John Cena train though was far too strong, not to mention WWE themselves weren't really interested in positioning talent at a much higher place. CM Punk and Daniel Bryan managed to earn those spots, but it seemed like nobody else was going to rise up the ranks fast and become a major star. With the Shield, the trio complemented each other perfectly, and it highlighted all their bright spots, especially Roman Reigns, who everybody noticed was pretty green. It didn't matter though because the man was a badass. He was what Arn Anderson was to the Four Horsemen and what Batista was to Evolution, the big muscle of the group. Reigns wasn't improving at a fast rate like the other two. They had plenty of experience in their indie days, and the biggest problem they had was probably getting used to the hard cam in their early days. The Shield was a massive success and the coolest thing WWE had put out at the time. I remember really enjoying their work and considering them some of the very best out there. I did think John Cena would bury them, but after the Chamber pay-per-view, those doubts went away. The Shield eventually had to go their separate ways, but the future was bright. It was almost guaranteed for all three men to become main eventers. Why? Because they were so gifted and young. Roman Reigns was positioned as the next big thing only a couple of weeks after the Shield split. This man was already main eventing and challenging for the World Championship, and the fans didn't have much of a problem with Reigns. As a matter of fact, he was cheered throughout the months and even had a great match with Randy Orton at SummerSlam. It wasn't really exposed much around this time. Roman Reigns was on an upward trajectory. Even with an injury, they left him sidelined for 3 months. That injury time really changed a lot. The shine off being a former member of the Shield faded, and while Seth Rollins and Dean Ambrose feuded, both men clearly deviated away from their identities as the Hounds of Justice. Whereas Roman Reigns was still the same guy and was becoming more and more exposed. Exposed in what way? Well, let's explain it. Being a single star in WWE, you have the brightest lights on you, especially if you're a semi-main eventer like Roman was. His promo at Survivor Series 2014 was very weak, and even though the crowd was cheering him, that was going to come to an end. WWE had made no doubts about who their next face of the company was, and it was going to be the big dog. Again, fans cheered him at the time, but this was slowly fading because of his weak promo skills, and of course, the CM Punk shoot interview. When CM Punk left the WWE in 2014, he ended up featuring on a shoot interview or a podcast interview with Colt Cabana where he told the story. At the time, people already knew that Roman Reigns was getting pushed. They had an idea of where his push was going to go. However, they didn't understand how hard WWE was going at him. So when CM Punk mentioned how there was a certain handicap match where he had to make Roman look strong and WWE was adamant on this, fans turned on him. If you're wondering, what effect does that make? WWE fans at the time were much different than the fans that they have today. A lot of the fans that they had back then are mostly AEW fans nowadays, so they were on the internet a lot. That played a very big part in that. Roman had a lot of support from WWE, and that obviously came with a lot of baggage, not to mention a lot of dislike and eventually disdain from fans. He was positioned in a high place on the card so early in his run, and the big difference Roman had compared to all the other top wrestlers was that he didn't have any sort of mid-card rise to transition into a main event run. So these things all led to the Royal Rumble in Philadelphia. In front of a rabid crowd that wanted no part of Roman Reigns, WWE not only refused to give fans a false hope of the other fan favorites winning, but also threw them out early. The big dog overcame the odds for the first time, which would set up a common occurrence throughout this era of WWE. Shades of prime John Cena forced the crowd to boo and demand changes before a strong push for Roman Reigns materialized. He won this Rumble, and even though The Rock came out to endorse Reigns, fans wanted no part of it. Rock was probably dumbfounded hearing a crowd boo because that's some old 2002 stuff for him. I don't even think Rock knew what a negative reception was at this point in his career. Such a foreign concept, but the norm for Roman Reigns. WWE continued to push having Daniel Bryan show a lot of respect to him and putting him over in ring and on the mic. I felt like the worst case scenario at WrestleMania with Brock leaving and Roman reigning atop the WWE as a Green World Champion. There was a way out, and while the match didn't end up being this horrible battle, the build made it seem gloomy. Instead, it was one of the best WrestleMania matches in recent memory and one of my favorites ever. A pure fight that brought out the best and final boss, Brock Lesnar. He was presented very well here as the best version of his unstoppable beast arc. Roman Reigns, on the other hand, actually fit the role of an underdog in this situation because Brock was an actual threat. And with these things combined, it was a spectacle and the greatest example of a WWE main event. Two big guys destroying each other in front of a worldwide audience. This was one of Roman Reigns' very best performance because the main focus wasn't on trying to make him look good and strong. He did look strong near the end, but that wasn't the thing they were trying to shove down your throat. This was one of the only matches where he was the perfect underdog, and that's because the situation called for it. Seth Rollins was the way out for WWE here, but it was only a matter of time before the big dog became the number one guy because it was the only thing WWE knew. Considering making somebody else number one was never an option. Roman quickly went into a feud with the Big Show that was mostly one-sided because there was no way that Big Show in the big 2015 was going over anyone of note. It took a while for Roman to actually talk about about WrestleMania 31 and its loss in storyline, but there was zero lack of confidence for Roman, and here in this promo you'd think he won. This was a common criticism of him at the time, where his character did not sell his losses as hard as he should. Once he mentioned the Seth Rollins cash in, he was annoyed, but more about the Big Show, who was Rollins' giant bitch. But Big Show simply mentioned that Roman failed at WrestleMania, whereas he won the Andre the Giant Battle Royal. It seemed like the crowd was bored of this feud already, and Roman called them out for a fight. Roman told them about what's to come, and Big Show did eventually respond to this, destroying him on top of a car. It was all about making Roman the biggest failure. That's the story. The big dog didn't want to wait until Extreme Rules, but then Bo Dallas of all people came out and got knocked out. This all led to a last man standing match at Extreme Rules, and no, Bo Dallas was not his opponent, it was a Big Show. There was zero hope for this match at all. Nobody cared about the build, but once the bell rang, it turned out to be a huge surprise, with Big Show having one of his best matches ever. The match is actually thrilling and very back and forth. Even the biggest hater of Roman Reigns at the time, well, actually, I'm sorry. They actually tried to find ways to hate on this match, because at the time, there was a lot of hatred towards him. So I originally wrote here, quote, even the biggest hater of Roman Reigns at the time can't deny that this was one of the best matches on the entire show. That is wrong. I actually searched the match. People obviously underplayed it, but they just didn't like him. I thought this was a good match, personally. And again, it's not like you have to think this is a good match. I just think a lot of people hated it because it was Roman Reigns who was in this match. There was, of course, this moment, even though the result was known, it was still some nice stuff. This victory was enough to put his name back in title contention. It's loaded with spots, obviously, because it's a no DQ last man standing match and Roman's limited, but it still doesn't take away from their performance. Big Show here was great. This was a standout performance for the Big Show, one of his best in a couple of years. I think the last time he had a match as good as this was against Sheamus in 2012. Other than that, though, Roman was still in the main event scene. He was going to get pushed hard, but it wasn't as hard as it would eventually be. Kane had a lot of issues with Seth Rollins and decided to make things tougher for him, placing Roman Reigns, Randy Orton, and Dean Ambrose in a title match at Payback. This was initially a triple threat match, but Ambrose found a way in to make it a fatal four-way match. This also meant that this was the first time the Shield were going to compete against each other in a match. At the time, Roman and Dean teamed up almost every week on SmackDown, but they never faced each other. Rollins had to use instigation in order to take some of the heat off of him. It was the only way he'd score the victory. It worked. The championship gold makes everyone go crazy. For Roman Reigns, he wasn't exactly shocked that Dean hit him with a dirty deeds. It was the love of the game, but Reigns thought that this was his story to finish. After all, Rollins backstabbed him the hardest. These two were brothers until the end, but nothing was going to get in the way of the WWE World Heavyweight Championship. With that said, this match isn't talked about much. I consider it a hidden gem of sorts, especially seeing as the Shield don't interact nowadays. It wasn't a classic by any means, but these four put on a good show here. The best match of the show for certain. 2015 Rollins was on fire during this time period. A lot of complaints were made towards the way he was presented and booked, but the moment the bell rang, this guy gave the performance of a lifetime. The most memorable part of this match was when the Shield reunited for a couple of seconds. Rollins was on a high that would quickly go south, but he did eventually retain the title, and Roman went elsewhere, whereas Ambrose feuded with the champion. The big dog was focused on Money in the Bank and confirmed that he was competing in the ladder match. If I remember at the time, I think it was the favorite. Roman remained closely associated with Ambrose in the build to Money in the Bank, and the big dog had many hurdles in the way, being forced to wrestle multiple matches in one night to save his spot in the Money in the Bank ladder match. The toughest challenge was the main event against Bray Wyatt. Roman already walked into the match with injured ribs, but he managed to overcome the odds, which is a common story during this time period, after Kane tried to interfere, and that was enough for the spot. Roman was becoming a bigger target for the Authority, and it got to the point where Kane inserted himself in the Money in the Bank match to prevent him from winning the briefcase. The reactions for Roman around this time weren't as bad as later on, but everyone knew how his push would end. His promos felt pretty generic and lacked any sort of identity, and that was becoming a bigger problem as time went on. Side note, this R-Truth promo was hilarious at the time. This guy was cutting the promo of a lifetime from the Money in the Bank, then Kane shouting, "You're not in the match!" Truth was so confused about this thing, like he's a prominent main eventer. This was great because it came from out of nowhere and the best example of the element of surprise. No one even thought that Truth would interrupt, let alone claim he's winning. Surprisingly though, Sheamus ended up winning the Money in the Bank. He came so out of the left field, but I think we should have expected it because he was the only notable heel in the match. Kane was never going to win anything. Neville's Money in the Bank isn't a good fit. Not that he wasn't deserving, I just can't imagine him at the time coming out with the briefcase. Roman had the match won when Bray Wyatt came out and cost him the match. This was a common occurrence at the time, with Wyatt just randomly interfering in main eventer matches and feuding with them for 3 months. They quickly booked the match for Battleground. Roman came out the next night and in a state of anger. Usually he'd lose some important match and crack some jokes. The Eater of Worlds didn't bother to come out, but offered a tale of doom for the big dog. Wyatt felt that his destiny was to climb that ladder, and stealing the opportunity 2 weeks earlier ruined the opportunity for World to have some sort of beacon of hope. He blamed that on Roman's ego. So long story short, he basically blamed Roman for ruining everything after costing him his own opportunity 2 weeks ago. Wyatt implied that Roman was just like John Cena. Not by name though, same description. Two polar opposites were Roman Reigns and Bray Wyatt. He felt that they need each other. When it came down to it, Wyatt would like anyone else but Roman on top. This mostly came from the fact that Roman was the chosen one. The story quickly got personal with Wyatt feeling that it's a bad time to fight as Father's Day is around the corner. This feud offered Roman a great chance to explore a different side of his character. With Bray Wyatt, he often brought something else out of John Cena, Daniel Bryan, and Dean Ambrose. Wyatt managed to do a great job of getting into Roman's head in the lead up to the pay-per-view, and he promised to not let Roman succeed. Anyone but you. Roman thought he finally got his hands on Wyatt, but it turned out to be an imposter at one point. The man was 3 steps ahead of him. Wyatt looked almost unstoppable throughout this entire build, and it wasn't until the final week that Reigns actually got one over him. Wyatt claimed he felt his presence and found some admiration in Reigns. He understood why the fans believed in him. That's funny. Roman wanted to fight, but for Wyatt, he said that Reigns didn't hold any power over him. His disdain for him led to Wyatt asking Roman to tell his family that he can't promise he'll come home. The big dog seemed to figure out Wyatt's tactics just in time for Battleground. I remember watching this pay-per-view, but I don't even remember how this match went at all. It's so blurry to me. It turned out to be surprisingly solid though, I will say that. One thing I recall between Wyatt and Reigns is that they had great chemistry and balled hard in their matches. Bray had a weird reputation in ring, especially once he turned into the Fiend. And because his stories usually had payoffs that never felt satisfying or reached the level or potential of the storylines, it makes you forget some things. This is one of those things, because I thought this match was pretty good. If you're a big Bray Wyatt fan, you're most likely familiar with this match, but I consider it to be a gem. It's forgotten because it wasn't what their later match was, and the fact that it was in the middle of the Roman Reigns experiment. Reigns did improve throughout the year, and this match is proof of that. He wasn't going to put on a match as good as this one a year earlier with Wyatt. I don't see it. For Wyatt, this was a victory. Luke Harper interfered, and he managed to take advantage of that. This was the first time those two interacted in about a year. Harper and Wyatt went their separate ways, and it worked well for Luke Harper because he was IC champion. But at their very best, it was always going to be with Bray Wyatt at the forefront as the leader of the Wyatt family. The family was coming back, and it didn't bode well for Roman Reigns. It was already a struggle to deal with Bray Wyatt alone, but he didn't even need to call his old brother because he was there. Wyatt challenged Roman to a tag team match at SummerSlam, family versus family, and he let him know that he welcomed this war. It was what Bray Wyatt wanted. The four men had many encounters on Raw and SmackDown. Roman and Harper even had a match on both Raw and SmackDown in the same week. Things were looking bright for Roman Reigns and Dean Ambrose, but Wyatt seemed to see it a little differently. The tag team match offered variety in the feud. Ambrose and Harper know that fast-paced style well, as evident by their matches earlier in the year, whereas Roman and Wyatt are more grittier and hard-hitting battle. Ambrose is a top-tier baller in this one, and that was very common during this time period. He always brought a certain explosiveness in his matches, especially in the final act. There's an extra energy with him that's incredible. Roman managed to get his win back from Battleground to make it 1-1, but the feud was far from over. I remember thinking Dean would turn heel at the time, although the story had no real reason to go that way. I was so convinced. Instead, the feud was extended. Bray Wyatt brought out a new member of the Wyatt family, and he went by the name of Braun Strowman. He was untouchable and basically gave the Wyatt family a new edge. These two got destroyed, but even then still went out there on SmackDown for a fight. The Wyatt family took their time and preferred to deal with them later on. Same thing on Raw. Roman and Dean were still persistent, but they couldn't even knock down Strowman, let alone take them out. The black sheep of the Wyatt family proved to be the difference maker. Even Randy Orton wasn't safe from an attack. Anyone who was a potential partner was taken out, even Jimmy Uso. I'm sure Rikishi wasn't happy about that one. The partner seemed more and more unlikely as both men couldn't really find anyone. Roman thought this proved that Bray was a fraud, and for trying to make it a 3-on-2 tag team match, it was going to be 3-on-3. Despite all of his efforts, Bray thought nobody was stupid enough to join Ambrose and Reigns, but regardless though, they all fell down. WWE left a lot of money on the table turning down this Shield faction. I don't even understand why they didn't let this guy become the third member of the Shield. It is what it is. The mystery partner ended up being Chris Jericho. Jericho hadn't been seen in a year, and the problem was his presence and presentation was the same for the last 3 years, so it didn't hit that hard. The crowd did react crazy though. I just remember feeling like, oh, Chris Jericho, okay. It did tie into the Wyatt family story with Jericho feuding with him a year earlier. The match was pretty good. Y2J showed up here, as did Ambrose and Reigns, but it was always going to end one way, especially because of how they were trying to rebuild the Wyatt family. Jericho ended up disrespecting both men and walking away after the match. Randy Orton was back the next night and put up much more of a fight compared to Jericho. This wasn't appreciated by Ambrose because of Y2J's actions. Roman, though, was looking ahead on the main event match against Wyatt. That was very intense, and again, it left things open for the real finale. Both men couldn't be contained inside the ring, tried to use weapons on each other, and even fought in the crowd. This was the best action this feud had seen, and it set up a proper Hell in a Cell. Hell in a Cell used to happen in October, and most of the time, the feud would just have that match as a way of extending the feud. Not this one. It was long-term stuff that needed to end inside the cell. These two couldn't compete in a normal match. There was a high level of animosity, and on SmackDown, they managed to set up the match. Roman just said Hell in a Cell and left. I personally believe Vince was like, dang, he thought to himself, that's a superstar right there when he just said those 4 words. Wyatt was more than happy to have the match, he welcomed it, and both men had one last confrontation before their match at Hell in a Cell. Roman did an analysis of Wyatt's character and said that he's scared to be alone. Roman pushed his button and these two couldn't continue the segment, instead opting for a fight. The big dog's hands were full, but he was up for it, as was Dean Ambrose. It didn't matter though, because those two were teaming up in a 6-man tag team match to face the Wyatt family. Their partner, Seth Rollins. The Shield reunion was happening, but without all the friendship and brotherhood. None of that was here, nor were any of them interested in dealing with Rollins or, from his perspective, Ambrose and Reigns. The trio were all their own men now, not to mention weren't tied together under the guise of loyalty. It was the same way for Ambrose and Reigns, but it was clearly much different than previously. I remember this, it felt like the Shield were so far away from reuniting. The faces weren't relying on Rollins to save him, so when he left, it wasn't a shocker. They went back to work. The good guys managed to score the victory without Rollins, who did what he did best: let down his brothers. With that said, the match at Hell in a Cell was great. It was a wonderful way to end the feud. What you would expect this match to be beforehand ended up being just that, in a good way. They had some cool spots. Bray bled a bit. Accident, of course, and a lot of great sequences involving these two. A Sister Abigail counter to a roll-up was beautiful. This was one of my favorite parts of the entire match. These two just threw everything out there like it was supposed to be. Countless moments that stood out from this one, and I'm inclined to believe that it's better than you remember. One of Bray Wyatt's best matches ever for certain, top 5 easily for me. Roman Reigns' 2015 was weird. He was pretty green in the beginning, and even though he wasn't the best around this time, he had made strides, not to mention shine brightest when the match was violent. There was still work to do with him though. As for this match, tremendous. It was very different to other cell matches in the sense of both men using it as a prison as opposed to the structure being a weapon. They didn't interact with the cell much. It did go on a bit long, but that's not too much of a problem. Roman Reigns was riding on a high from this victory that would send him back in title contention. The next night on Raw, Roman Reigns interrupted Seth Rollins' moment to put his name out there for the WWE World Heavyweight Championship. He called himself the #1 contender and said he's taking the title. Roman had to beat Kofi Kingston to win a spot in the main event Fatal 4-Way, and the winner faces Seth Rollins for the title at Survivor Series. Roman Reigns scored the victory to set up the match. It was always meant to happen because throughout the months, Seth had constant run-ins with Reigns. It had a deep story tied to it, with Rollins' betrayal of the Shield bringing him the ultimate prize. All he had to do was reign on the parade of his brothers on 2 occasions, the night after Payback and WrestleMania 31. Rollins couldn't believe that Reigns complimented him and was so gracious to return the favor, saying that he would have recruited him to the Shield if he wasn't good. Rollins appreciated the fact that Roman pushed Brock Lesnar to the limit, but he reminded him of the result, which of course was victory for Seth Rollins. The champion said that history will remember him as the guy who held his backs. The Authority booked the Survivor Series elimination match with both Roman and Rollins as the captains of their team. Of course, it had to end with the Shield. Rollins' partners were all eliminated and he was left with the 2 men that he stabbed in the back. It was a tough situation, but a steel chair set him free, just like it did a year and a half earlier. Even then, Roman still looked strong. Unfortunately, Seth Rollins tore his ACL later that week, and this injury forced him to relinquish the WWE World Heavyweight Championship. This was terrible because this man was holding the title for 7 months and was on fire in ring. He was in the best form of his career, and it's tragic. It's tragic that he never got to drop the title to close the book on the run. This also caused long-term changes in Rollins' style in ring. He used to wrestle freely with no worry of his knee. Now he didn't have the same speed and intensity as previously, not to mention half of his matches involve him selling the knee. It's always a common story that would be used throughout his matches. The WWE tried to make good on this by having a Survivor Series Deadly Games type tournament. Triple H quickly lashed onto the big dog and gave him a free pass to the final. This was basically the game trying to claim that Roman was considered to be the face of the WWE. Triple H pointed out that Seth Rollins would do anything to get the job done, as evident by WrestleMania 31. Through the months, Reigns still hasn't learned his lesson. Months after months of struggle just to get a chance. However, Triple H could make those struggles go away. All he has to do is join the Authority. It comes with a lot of great things, a spot in the final, and if Seth Rollins' run is proof, then he's in for an interesting time. Roman considered it being a sellout, but Triple H told him not to worry about stupid things. He's already going to get criticized as it is. If he wants this, he has to think logically and understand that this comes with criticism. Triple H tried really hard to get him to accept and join the Authority. The moment Roman spoke, the fans booed. He said he doesn't take handouts and turned down this one. This is a reminder of why Triple H didn't choose him and said that he goes to the back of the line. He faced the Big Show. This was the round of 16 match in the Survivor Series tournament. It's a Big Show, so you know what it means. But with regards to this story, WWE is making it seem like Roman was not their handpicked guy, and everyone could see through it. With someone like Stone Cold, not only was he the most charismatic wrestler on the card, but his personality and character was perfect. Roman seemed clean-cut and someone WWE would really want to be the face of the company, even in storylines, so it doesn't translate well. He's going up against the Machine when he's a product of that machine. He was forced in that position. This was where things with Roman Reigns took a turn. He wasn't getting the best reactions throughout the year, but you also heard a lot of cheers from some of the fans. That wasn't the case after Survivor Survivor Series. Roman beat Cesaro in the quarterfinal to set up a semi-final battle against Alberto Del Rio. But I want to talk about that match with Cesaro for a moment. This man had a tremendous 2015 in-ring. I really liked the fact that he turned face and just went insane in-ring. Roman had gotten much better at the time compared to the beginning of the year. He was holding his own more so than getting carried. Funny enough, reading about it from that time's perspective, a lot of people were trying to point out flaws so badly because they didn't like Reigns. It's a common theme from 2015 to 16. I thought I was over-exaggerating on how people didn't like him personally. Cesaro was a real star of this match. Of course, he was in ridiculous form in 2015. The difference with this year to 2014 is that he got to work in more prominent positions and take the role of a face. I think it suited him well because he's very athletic and strong. Here, Roman had his arm targeted and he didn't sell it the best, but the match was good in spite of that. It was a pay-per-view quality match thrown on TV and highlighted the importance and prestige of the WWE World Heavyweight Championship. With that said, the match with Del Rio wasn't all that, but the result was clear as day. This led to the final clash, Dean Ambrose. Both men went their separate ways, opting to take the long road to the World Championship, but their own brother was the final obstacle in front of championship glory. Decent but short match that wasn't going to be all of that. Their story needed a long-term build, and even then they didn't have a lot of time. Roman Reigns scored the victory to win the WWE World Heavyweight Championship for the first time. The result wasn't really out of the question because Reigns was their guy and there was no huge heel at the time to take the title. At least that's what it looked like. Triple H came out to congratulate the new champion and take away from the moment. Roman didn't want none and speared him. All of a sudden, Sheamus came out and rained on the parade. He hit the bro kick, but Roman kicked out. The second attempt didn't work, but as Reigns went for the spear, boom, bro kick. 1, 2, 3, new champion. Triple H was proud of the fact that Sheamus cashed in the briefcase. I low-key wish Sheamus won the title later on. Anytime from 2016 to 19, I would have been cool with it, even if it was a short run. Here, some of the fans accepted him just because it wasn't Reigns, and even that feeling quickly wore off. They tried to make Roman look like the wronged underdog, but everyone booed him after the match. But this is a bad situation entirely because of the two men. Sheamus was one of the worst booked Money in the Bank holders with zero memorable moments since winning the briefcase, not to mention a man that lost just about every feud and big match in those months. On the other side, Dean Ambrose is gaining more and more momentum as the days go by and had the entire crowd's support. He was charismatic, could talk, and of course put on a show at the main event level. Instead of pushing him, they wanted to push Roman Reigns, who still didn't figure it out, and they were trying to make it seem like he wasn't the handpicked guy, when in reality, he was always the guy they wanted. Everything was bad. Cena was injured, Orton was out, Rollins was out, Brock had yet to return, very few highlights at the time. WWE was adamant that the Roman Reigns push was going to happen, and it was going to happen while he was portrayed as an underdog, when the perfect underdog was right by his side. Roman's obstacles would grow over the next few weeks. The League of Nations was a way to give Sheamus more legitimacy, and Kevin Owens almost joined the group, but got sick that day. I'd take a fever over getting a disease like this team was. Sheamus was going around wearing a 515 shirt, which marked the time Roman spent as champion. I don't even remember Reigns calling Sheamus a tater tot. This promo was horrible, and he was constantly calling him tater tot. I'm almost shocked this segment went for 17 minutes, and was a prime example of Reigns' generic character. They had a good brawl afterwards with Reigns standing tall. The match at TLC was a pivotal moment in Roman's early career. It was a good one, but there was too much smoke surrounding the match. A match he lost after the League of Nations screwed him over, proceeded to destroy everyone in sight, including the COO Triple H. Initially, the fans booed him, but when he got more and more intense, they started cheering. This was the first time in a long time that Roman had a positive reaction. Why? Because it was something different, something that came natural, and every time you thought the beating would end, it would continue. He was actually intense here and resembled the Shield version of himself in the best way possible. That spear in the end was insane and got a reaction from the fans that almost seemed impossible. Destruction and carnage, the thing that goes hand in hand with Roman Reigns, and a great effect in getting him cheered would come with the return of Mr. McMahon. Vince was rarely seen on TV at the time, but in order to make Roman look good, it was necessary. And this was because they tried plenty of ideas and stories and none of them worked. So they took advantage of the story from the previous night, which left Triple H sidelined. The next night on Raw, Stephanie McMahon was ready to fire Roman Reigns. The big dog had zero remorse for his action and was ready to get fired. He called Stephanie a disgrace, and so she slapped him multiple times. She said that Triple H told her not to fire Roman, but her father just might, and the crowd went crazy. When the boss came out later that night, Vince told him not to be intimidated. He wanted an apology, but Roman didn't even consider it. There's a certain dynamic here with Vince as the villain, once again basically making Roman look much better. After all, he's one of the greatest heels of all time. Sheamus was such an uninteresting champion that, again, Roman looks much better than he is. Sheamus challenged him to a match for the title and said he wasn't worried about beating Reigns because he did it twice. Reigns threatened Vince's manhood, telling him that time had passed him by, so he called him an SOB. This was enough for the title match. He made the match official, but said that if Roman Reigns doesn't win the title, then he's fired. He also kicked him in the balls. This was basically the last resort to make Roman Reigns look good, and it was working so far. This episode of Raw followed a strong Attitude Era formula. Start, middle, and end. Basic storytelling, but it was most apparent in that era. So back then, a certain story would dominate the episode. Stone Cold, for example. He'd search for Vince after getting fired. He turns Vince's smile into a state of fear, catches him, and the conclusion of this would unfold at the end of the show. The odds were stacked against Roman Reigns in the main event, and they went above and beyond to try and get him over. I don't think anyone had this kind of booking in a single night during that era, especially on a random Raw. This man returned to Philadelphia and got cheered when he won the title. It was crazy and showed that they were willing to do anything to make him look good as the number one face of the company. Alright, that's where I'm going to end it. We ended it on a positive note. Fans obviously turned on Roman Reigns, but we'll do that in the next part, I'd say. The next part is most likely going to be about Triple H's WWE World Heavyweight Championship reign. That makes sense a lot to me because of the fact that if I were to continue the Roman Reigns video, we can't really talk about Triple H's side matches. He had 2 side matches, and I want to talk about those in great detail. But other than that, Roman's 2015 was funny. He had a roller coaster of a year, you know? Like, everyone knew they were going to push him. They didn't like him. And from what I've seen and what I recall, obviously, because I was old enough at the time, I remember very well, people did not like him, and any slight thing would be used against him, whereas if it's someone, say a wrestler, they would minimize that negative, you get what I mean? That's not to say like Roman's an amazing wrestler or anything like that, but he had some pretty good performances here. He was way better than he was in 2014, and shockingly, he was in ring, not as a character. In ring, he was much better than I remember him being at the time. Did I like Roman at the time? Not too much. I didn't hate him, obviously, but I didn't really like him too much because of the fact that there was just more interesting guys on the roster that shined brighter than him. I will say that this guy actually, for the most part, showed up when it mattered most. Like all of his matches with Bray Wyatt, Cesaro, and I'm sure the match with Seth Rollins would have been good. I think that Seth Rollins match is interesting to me because of the fact that when Rollins did come back in 2016, I was expecting something else. But Rollins wrestled a more grounded and more serious style compared to how he usually did in the past. So it kind of caught me off guard, and I didn't like that match as much as I did. The reason why I'm mentioning it is because I do wonder what it would have been like to see Rollins face Roman Reigns in a match with his 2015 style as we could have seen at Survivor Series. I think that would have gone down way better. Other than that, the Roman and Bray Wyatt feud had good matches throughout it. The story was decent. I'd say it's just WWE had much better stuff going on at the time. But other than that, yeah, Roman, I guess he was a bit better, but the problem comes down to his character. Again, a lot of people didn't like him personally. There's no lies there. A lot of people did not actually like this guy personally. I remember it very well, and I seen it while making this video. A lot of people didn't like him. WWE made it harder for him. You know, the promos were very generic. A lot of the stuff he talked about here was just bad. So yeah. Alright, what you guys think of Roman Reigns in 2015? Please comment down below, and that's the first video. Make sure you hit the Superman punch on the like button and perhaps the spear on the subscribe button. Peace, I'm out.